Alright, so we're continuing on from our Sydney Film Festival discussion. This is the second part of a multi-part series, I suppose. And the first film I saw was an anime called Pompo the Cinephile. This film tells the story of both an aspiring filmmaker and an aspiring actress working together on a, I guess you would say, Oscar bait film, which is being financed by the titular character Pompo. We followed them along pretty much from the commencement of the filming to the post-production phase, and it's very much a typical rags to riches story in a fictionalized Hollywood setting. What elevates this film, however, is its raw energy and ingenuity in the editing. There are some very creative screen wipes, one being a literal screen wipe of car windshield wipers wiping away one scene to transition into another. There's also a very meta component to the editing where we're often reminded we're watching a film, and in some aspects we actually see characters watching themselves within the screening room, and that kind of draws to one of the broader themes about parallels we have between our own art and our own lives. It's bubbly, energetic, and has a pretty killer soundtrack, so there won't be a single moment where you're not entertained. While this is a love letter to cinema, it doesn't shy away from the cynicism that comes along with it. You have scenes, albeit told in a comical style, involving financial loans and more superficial elements of films, such as having attractive stars to sell the product, and the aforementioned Pompo who infamously hates films that run beyond 90 minutes. Characters are somewhat stereotypical, but the fun really comes from their interactions with one another. This is a strong recommend even for those who might not be interested in anime. I mean, I fall in that category as well, and I was a little apprehensive about seeing this, but I had an absolute blast, and so did the audience I watched it with. This sits very comfortably in the 4 out of 5 star range. Check it out when you have a chance. So another film I would recommend, which was the second documentary feature I saw at the film festival, was Street Gang: How We Got to Sesame Street. It's highly informative and really gets to the spirit of what the show was about and what drove the creators, the writers, puppeteers, and actors in making it. I went in more or less interested to see the behind-the-scenes puppeteering, especially from both Jim Henson and Frank Oz, and there was certainly a lot of that. But I also got to learn some very invaluable information about the psychology behind the show in terms of teaching impoverished kids, especially those in inner-city America, through television. As for the puppeteering elements themselves, it was neat to see some behind-the-scenes archival footage of how exactly they were able to perform, but also keep an eye on the movement of their characters and the direction they were facing. If I had to think of some detriments for the film, I'd say that there were a couple of hiccups with the audio editing where you could clearly tell that they were cutting 2 or 3 different takes. I'd also say it's fairly stock standard as far as documentaries are done in terms of composition, editing, and the style of interviewing. Which is to say it's fine, but it's not amazing, and you're not going to get a lot out of this if you're looking for something innovative as far as visual style is concerned. But if you're here to learn about the early years of the show, it excels 110%. It was a very honest and raw film, really detailing some of the controversies of the show and getting a sense that not all was good behind the scenes with this big Sesame Street family. Likewise, they really dig into just the time and the energy that was needed to produce so many episodes over so many years. At one point, one of Henson's kids discusses how he would be gone for days on end, sometimes 3 or 4, whereas the composer of the show, who had to make original tracks for pretty much every episode, would work into the night as late as 3 AM. It was also kind of curious what they decided to include and omit as far as some of the more tragic elements of the show. Obviously, Mr. Hooper's death is discussed, as is the tragic passing of Jim Henson at a relatively young age. But oddly enough, even though there's a big emphasis on the work of Jim Stone on the show and the lack of attention he gets, it's strange that they then don't go into his death and what that meant for the Sesame Street gang. It was also curious that they had such a big emphasis on the partnership between Henson and Oz that they wouldn't include Oz as a potential interviewee. All in all, this is another easy 4 stars from me. Next up was a film, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to be butchering this title, Rehana, Maryam, Noor. The central story follows a female teacher at a university who witnesses a female student leave in distress from one of her male colleagues' offices and suspects some sort of sexual impropriety has happened. The rest of the film deals with her attempts to bring this man to justice for this heinous act she believes he has committed. This movie was trash as far as I'm concerned. I didn't mesh with it at all. While I appreciate it was probably made for very little money, with minimal locations and a small cast, this did affect the quality of the film in the sense that a lot of the camera was handheld to the point that it felt very egregious. It definitely could have benefited from a few different camera angles and takes and a couple more edits. Implementing a few additional cuts with maybe some more close-ups or reaction shots could have achieved more of an emotional impact. I hate to sound cynical, but I suspect one of the reasons this film got a lot of praise was due to the core narrative and themes sort of surrounding female justice in a more patriarchal order, but I just don't think you can overlook the quality of the execution for this feature. This probably sits at a 1.5, maybe 2-star rating. So the final film I want to chat about is another Japanese one called Wheel of Fortune and Fantasy. This one is about a series of 3 short stories, all with sort of interconnecting themes around ideas of friendship and love that involve chance encounters. I love the very naturalistic style to the film in terms of its lighting and flowing dialogue. The performances felt very real and authentic, and it looked like we were kind of privy to very real, very personal conversations. The film dived into deeper philosophical ideas on love, sensuality, and the self, but always in a way that felt authentic, rather than just sort of blatantly spelling it out for the audience. Often through just natural conversations between the characters, we'd sort of arrive to these ideas. I was also quite relaxed watching this film. I felt very at ease. It was one of the more calming works I've ever seen, which I probably attribute to the sublime piano score. There was maybe 1 or 2 technical issues I noticed that took me out of this film. One of the main things was some potential audio issues with the male character from the first short film. It seemed like some of his dialogue had a fuzz sound to it when he was talking, and that might be the room they possibly recorded in, or during filming he may have been too far away from the camera, so they've turned up the audio in post, and that might be the gain. As for the third story, there was a bit of a gimmick in it that a digital virus had essentially made all digital communications obsolete. Though it didn't really play a significant role in that story, I felt, to justify that concept. You could probably have the same impact of that story without having the whole virus set up. I think one way to sign off with this film is I never thought that I would find a 10-minute conversation between 2 women gossiping about a guy to be so enthralling, which I think speaks volumes. This one too sits comfortably in the 4 out of 5-star category. So that's it for this part of our Sydney Film Fest on topic discussion. I hope you guys join me for the next one. I'm sure it's going to be just as cringe-inducing as this one was. Bye!